Hi everyone, I'm Jesse Lynn.
And I'm Angela Lynn, and welcome back to another episode of But Where Are You Really From? Today, we're talking about a subject that we've been dancing around in our personal lives, which is social media and specifically the potential dark side of social media. Meh.
Wah, wah.
Basically, cyberbullying, etc. And I think this is not a new subject. It's something that has been around, I think, since the advent of the internet, really. But something that we wanted to talk about because it's like kind of more recently something top of mind for us. And I think that's because if you've been following our journey as we've been trying to grow this podcast, the main way that we're doing so is through amping up our social media game, and specifically we're like heavy on Instagram, but we are now heavy on TikTok and also moving into YouTube. And especially TikTok is just like such a space for conversation now in terms of like where people congregate to have discussion on social media outside of Twitter, but TikTok is where we are actively participating. And so I just wanted to talk about this because it's like there's kind of like pros and cons to this, right? Like being connected to everyone around the world via social media is such a like amazing thing, but also has like so many potential pitfalls. So like an example of how amazing it is, an example of how the like interconnectedness of all of us is so amazing. And hopefully, this doesn't change by the time between when I say this now and when it actually happens. But is like, as many of you know, we recently did an episode about the Ukraine war, and we've been pushing clips about that out on TikTok and Instagram. And we've been getting a lot of conversation from people in Ukraine and largely showing appreciation and gratitude towards us, kind of like raising awareness about what's going on and like getting people to talk more about the war. But some people gave us some shit because we had a Russian civilian on instead of, is how they saw it, instead of a Ukrainian. But if you actually listened to our episode, you saw that our initial intent was to have both a Russian and a Ukrainian on so that we could have both those perspectives. And unfortunately, because the Ukraine war is ongoing and super sensitive, the people that we had approached to fill that Ukrainian slot didn't come through in time. And it was such a timely discussion that we wanted to make sure we had it out. So anyway, some people were giving a shit on TikTok about having a Russian as opposed to Ukrainian. And something amazing that came through because of the interconnectedness of the internet is that one Ukrainian who is still in Kiev, I think that's how you actually pronounce it because I also got some shit about how you pronounce the capital. I think it's Kiev, not Kiev. But anyways, someone who is actually still in the capital right now has volunteered to come on our show as a follow-up episode that we're going to be recording 1 week from now. And so hopefully that still happens. But that's like a really wonderful example of like someone we would never have met in real life, but because of the internet and some like passing comment, right? Like they happen to see our clip and they happen to be like, hey, I can like add some color here. We're now connected to someone like directly in the middle of this like huge thing that's going on in the world. So that's like fucking amazing. And that's something that I think is just like, something we can't match with the power that the internet and social media has provided to all of us. And on the flip side, because we are now putting ourselves out there like full force on social media, starting all these conversations, being really vulnerable, we're also opening ourselves up to haters. And like, I don't want to call them, I mean, cyberbullying, you can define that how you will. Trolls is probably the more like accepted and more commonly used term. We're getting a lot more trolls now, and especially depending on which topics we're covering. So for example, the like biggest wave of cyberbullying slash trolling I was getting while we were running this TikTok stuff was the episode that we were talking about the simplified versus traditional Chinese writing systems. And it was just such a like weird one because I was like, why am I getting shat on for this? It's like we were just exploring like the two different writing systems and like how we personally get confused because we're ABCs and blah blah blah. And there were just a lot of people like rolling in to tell me like you're so wrong and like how dare you blah blah blah. And then a bunch of like Chinese nationalists who are like can't wait for Taiwan to reunify with China and like all this shit. And I was like, whoa, bro, I didn't come in here with that kind of energy. And it was just like waves of people like that. And it was the first time in my life that I've dealt with that. So it was just like, I was simultaneously happy that people were interested enough in, you know, the content to be in heated discussion about it, but also just like it took a really strong toll on me, like personally, because I mean, these are all people that are just hiding behind like a fake avatar on the internet, but at the same time, they're directing comments towards me because
Hmm.
it's like my face that's out there saying these things. And they're like calling me a liar or like telling me I'm stupid or like telling me Taiwan's not a country. You know, there's just like all these things. And I was like, it's really hard for me to separate like things that I should be taking personally and things that I shouldn't be taking personally. So, yeah, this is why I think we're like recently inspired to talk about this subject because it is something that we've like personally been starting to um, have to deal with ourselves.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's interesting that, I don't know, I feel like when the internet first became a thing, like became widely accessible to people, there was immediately already like some weird, like people were trolling in like forums, like proto
Mm-hmm.
areas where you could like message people. And I feel like there was this whole thing where it was like, as the internet matures, like those people will disappear because it will be less easy for them. Like it will be less easy for them to hide behind the anonymity of being on the internet. But I feel like that's actually accelerated because so many people are on the internet
Mm-hmm.
now, and there are so many different ways to access the internet. Like you could be using the internet through like let's say clear web, like regular internet. You could be using the internet through the dark web. You could be using a VPN. Like there's so many ways to like access the internet and obfuscate who you are that I think it's become a larger problem than it was in the past, but it's gotten less recognition because everybody is on the internet now.
Yes.
So it's kind of like we've talked about this whole like social contract in certain situations before. It's kind of like you are contracting potentially to be harassed on the internet because you're on the internet and it's kind of not lawless, but it's like there's not really like governing body necessarily, similar to how this contract that you have when you go on like content sites is you see an ad for the content. So it's kind of that situation. And to your point, like it's spread to different areas. So it's an interesting topic, I think, to take a look at.
Yeah. And I will add one thing is I think there is just kind of like a little added layer of understanding around like what types of people engage on the internet once you are someone who puts out content for the internet.
Hmm.
Because, for example, we talked about on Twitter, both of us largely just lurk and we do not actually like tweet. We just read people that we follow.
Hmm.
Before I started posting our stuff on TikTok, especially, I think I largely felt like, oh, the people who like engage on social media are largely like the content creators and like people who at least are investing enough to like put their face as their avatar. If they're going to be like talking on the internet, they like are invested enough in conversations that they think they're part of this like community or whatever, right? And what I've found since posting our stuff and people asking questions or like shitting on me or like whatever they're doing is that I would say the majority of people that engage are just like blank avatar people.
Mm.
They are the lurkers, but they are lurkers who like to like chime in,
Yes.
especially if it's something where they can say something kind of mean, but like stay anonymous.
Mm.
And it just, I constantly think of the and sorry, I talk about this story a lot, and I'm like I've always butchered whatever the actual quote is, but like Brene Brown, who's like Hala, one of the loveliest motivational speaker type people out there, but I remember watching, oh no, I read her book, one of her books,
Hmm.
and she started out saying like some things that she kind of has to like remind herself of all the time is that she gets haters all the time. When you're a public figure, this is like even beyond social media, right? Like when you're like an actual public figure, you get a
Hmm.
lot of haters because you're just like easy to get picked on.
Yeah.
And she was saying like, she's personally also dealt with kind of like how much do I like let hurt me versus not.
Hmm.
And her kind of mantra is like those who are not brave enough to enter the stadium themselves. So like think of it as like a
Yeah.
gladiator or whatever, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
if you're not brave enough to enter the stadium, you don't have a right to say anything or to have me care about what you are saying
Hmm.
about me
Yeah.
because yeah, why should I care? Like I'm the one being brave enough to like be vulnerable, put myself out there like in the most out there way possible publicly, right? And if you're going to just be this like anonymous hiding behind a avatar or nothing kind of person, who cares what you have to say? And like easier said than done, but like
Yeah.
I when I'm like having trouble with like how much do I care about this or not, I constantly kind of think about that mantra and I'm like, okay, I just have to like make myself believe it, but like it makes a lot of sense to me. And yeah, it was just like it was interesting to me to see the proportion of people that engage that like literally have posted no content ever
Yeah.
are like private with like user 95612 and like are like in it heated like shitting on you. It's crazy.
Yeah, so a few things. I think it will be interesting because we were just talking about to back it up with some stats. So there's a study on pewresearch.org. I get all of my internet related studies from there. It's a couple years old, released in 2017, and it's about kind of just online harassment in general. So they surveyed a bunch of users, and the conclusion was the larger share of internet users view the online environment as a space that facilitates anonymity more than in 2014. So it's a couple of years old, but basically, overall, like they surveyed the user on three kind of question areas. So it's like, is it more anonymous? Like the percentage of users who say online environment allows people to be more anonymous, more critical, or more supportive of others. The more critical and more supportive, the percentages about the same, but the largest difference is in the more anonymous category. So in 2014, 62% of internet users said that the online environment allowed people to be more anonymous, versus in 2017, 86% of those surveyed said that it allowed people to be more anonymous. So definitely, I think people are like your experience is you're picking up on the fact that there are more and more users that are effectively anonymous because they have no information, they don't post anything, they just like comment shit things. And that volume of users seems to be outweighing those users who are generating critic what was that generating critical or supportive kind of comments.
Which I guess is in contrast to like when MySpace and Facebook or whatever first came out, right? And you had to like kind of verify who you were. Not that everyone was real, but like it felt more like you couldn't be anonymous because especially Facebook when that first
Facebook,
came
yeah.
out, you had to be like university or high school
Email.
affiliated, like
Email. Yeah.
yeah, it was like a real thing, so you couldn't be anonymous, you couldn't be a troll like that.
Hmm.
So I guess because when you read that stat, I was like, why is that a stat? Because it's so like obvious to me that like the
Yeah.
internet has so many anonymous people, but in contrast to kind of the way things started of like when social media and these like connected online groups first became a thing, it was a lot less anonymous because it was weirder if you had like a fake picture.
Yeah,
People were
people wouldn't
expecting you
engage
to,
with you. Yeah.
yeah, totally.
And I also think like there are so many more ways you can be anonymous now, right? Like back then it was like you had a few large portals, Facebook, MySpace, maybe a third thing, like if you were,
I mean, there
I don't
were,
even know.
to your point, forums like Reddit and
Yeah,
whatever.
forums. But now there's those things basically, well, not MySpace, but those things still exist. But now you have all of these other platforms that anyone can join and anonymously post things on. So there's just like an infinite amount of places that a person can be a troll in, versus like in the past, they really had not like limited scope, but they had fewer places where they could troll around in. Oh, I was gonna follow up on your comment regarding like not letting things absorb into yourself because I do think that um, social media use is like really damaging to your self-esteem for sure. And the way that I deal with comments is actually I try to think about like what the internet was for me when I first started using it. And the internet was for me like E-bombs world. Like just like it was just I like when I first started using the internet, it was just like trash internet. It's like
Mm.
MySpace, E-bombs world, like um just all the bad things that I wanted to do, I did on the internet. And so I think about it that way and I'm like, oh, I can't take this seriously. Like this is like the dumping ground for me. This is where I go to like do all the things that are like weird, like gross, like all that stuff. And it can't be like a reality for me. And so I think about that and then I'm like, okay, like this is all just like not real and I don't need to pay attention to it because it's the same like I don't put that stuff out as like my normal person, I don't like go up to someone and be like, here's my internet search history. Like, this is what I like. It's like everyone has kind of their like dual thing. So I try to just think about like the internet is not like a serious place. It's all like for me, like the origin has always been like a that it's been like a ridiculous, silly like playground. And when I think about it like that, it doesn't affect me as much because I'm like, why am I so stressed over like what this person in this like ridiculous place is telling me about? Like I don't care about that. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess both are true, though. It is simultaneously a ridiculous playground with like stupid things. That is definitely the internet, aka like why meme culture is
Exists.
half of
Yeah.
the internet. But at the same time, I think because people use it legitimately as a place to connect also with other people in
Mhm.
conversation with each other when you're remote, for example, blah, blah. There's like a lot of serious aspects of like usage of the internet that
Sure.
makes it difficult for me to just completely
Mhm.
disregard this as like a dumping ground of bullshit,
Mhm.
because there are so many like real things going on, and also like I don't know, because, well, maybe because I like quit my job and this is like my only thing. This is my main thing
Yeah,
now. So
yeah.
like the like content creator like title, right? That your whole job is the internet and like being on the
Yeah.
internet. So I can't disregard it like that for me,
Mhm.
unfortunately. It's like I can't make that separation. And so I'm like, this is me. This is, and like the things we're putting out there is us. It's not like a
Mhm.
fake version of us, like what we talk about right
Yeah, yeah.
now and is what goes on and like is what we actually think this is our actual experience. So it's just like it's hard for me to separate. But anyways,
Yeah.
this actually ties into, like you said, we wanted to bring in some stats, and I don't know if we need to like rattle off all the stats, just like ones that are kind of relevant, I guess, to what we're saying.
Mhm.
But kind of to show like how the complexity of the internet has both these like dark and good sides. We've been talking about like the negative aspects of how the internet, what the internet has brought forward, but actually, I saw some interesting stats from, let me see. Oh, it's actually, it might have been the same Pew Research that you were pulling from. It was 2018.
Oh,
Um,
mine's a year older, but
Oh, okay. This is 2018 Pew Research, and it says that 81% of teens say social media makes them feel more connected to what's going on in their friends' lives. And I
mm,
saw it's not just this study, I have like at least two or three additional ones that say essentially the same thing. So it's this weird dichotomy because it is simultaneously a place that very easily hits people's self esteems in like a really bad way because you're comparing what other people are doing. You feel like you have to like put the best stuff out there, blah, blah, blah. But
mhm.
at the same time, especially Gen Z and below, right? Like people who are like born into the internet age, as opposed to us, where we like
Mhm.
knew life before the internet and then transitioned into the internet age.
Uh-huh.
So people who are like born into this digital age, it is kind of the main way that they stay connected with their friends. So it's they cannot separate it, like you said, because this
Yeah.
is like it's literally another version of real life for them. It's like it's not like internet social media becomes like fake life and like IRL is the only real life. It's like this is both real life,
Mm.
and it has this positive impact of them, of like if I'm not able to spend like physical time with all my friends, when I like talk to them, catch up with them, like their thing, comment on their thing, it makes me feel like I'm actually interacting with them even though it's only through digital means.
That's interesting because like I I always feel like my hypothesis or conjecture was that like generations past like younger than us would be able to navigate the internet in a way that is even less um where they would be tricked even less than we are, if that makes sense. Because like I'm starting to get to a point where I'm like, oh, do I understand the internet anymore? Like, kind of like I'm reaching my like initial boomer
Mm,
situation where I'm like, do I understand the internet anymore? Like, am I being manipulated somehow? And I always felt like as you grew up with the stuff, it becomes easier for you because you're just like native there. But I've never thought about it kind of like the way you're describing it because a lot of the stuff that people have like brought to me, which is your real whatever your real Insta versus your Finsta,
mm-hmm.
that's all like Gen Z stuff. So I always thought that like, oh, they were able to, they understand how to separate it, right? You have your real Insta for your real people and your Finsta where you're projecting like whatever it is you want to project. Um, but that doesn't mean necessarily that there aren't like underlying things that people are experiencing, maybe not like consciously thinking about, because all of that for sure I think does have some kind of um, mental weight on your like functioning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, even the fact that you mentioned that people have real Insta versus Finsta implies that they do use the real one to like connect with actual people they care about. Like,
Yes.
so there are these two sides.
Mhm.
But since you're talking about kind of like the mental toll and whatnot, and we're talking about teens, I did want to share a few stats that are relevant. And I think we wanted to like chat specifically about kind of like people who are growing up now in this kind of like digital world and navigating it.
Mhm.
So something like, okay, I have some general stats that I think are interesting, and then like specifically re COVID and how that kind of like amplified everything.
Mhm.
So general stats. This is from the government's website, actually. The government website, but via UNESCO. So this is like global stats.
Okay.
Low socioeconomic status is a main factor in youth bullying. Basically, if you're poor, you're more likely to be bullied. And I
Mm.
think that that is especially true in places where maybe you go to a school where like not everyone is low income, and maybe you were like, you tested in or whatever, and you kind of always feel like you're odd one out, or you're just like on the border of like not as well off as other people. I think
Mm.
that's very much possible. And then this one hits home for us. Immigrant born youth in wealthy countries are more likely to be bullied than locally born youth.
Mm.
Hello,
Mm.
hello.
Mm.
Welcome to our lives. Yeah, so those are just like so noodle on some general stats. And then ones that I thought were really interesting, which is like I'm sure already expected this, but it was nice to see like real stats. These two studies are from COVID times.
Mm.
This is from a site anti cyberbullying site called Enough is Enough.
Mm.
But there's one study, and this was based in Europe, but from February 2021. It's really recent. 44% of children who had been cyberbullied before lockdown said it happened even more during
Mm.
lockdown.
Mm.
And then similarly, from a 2020, April 2021, there's been a 70% increase in the amount of bullying slash hate speech among teens and children in the month since the COVID lockdown began. So it's just like, I feel like what we just discussed about, the anonymous nature of people kind of congregating to the internet to like be negative and like do these things shielded behind this like hidden veil of anonymity. I already suspected that was the case, that like COVID made it worse. But
Hmm.
it was interesting to see these actual stats because basically it feels like to me, especially being a like kid growing up during this time and being ripped out of school for the last 2 years and doing like essentially homeschooling via Zoom and not having those normal social interactions with people, like especially if you were already not that comfortable in social settings, I could see it being just like a complete dumpster fire during COVID, where it's like people just like pile on because they're like, what do
Mm.
I have to lose? And a lot of it comes from like self hate as well. Like a lot of people who
Mm.
bully in general are because they like have insecurities about themselves.
Oh
But
yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people were just like, I feel like shit myself right now and I have
Exactly.
nowhere to like unleash this. So I'm
Yeah.
just going to like double down on my like outward hatred towards these other kids because I feel shitty about myself right now. So it's just like fucking
Yeah.
rough.
I mean, I think it's difficult, right? Because it's like when you're in a physical location for school, like you can't monitor cyberbullying, but you can monitor kids' usage of phones. You can see if they're
Hmm.
actually bullying people in real life. But as people are at home, it's very difficult to. I mean, I think we discussed this before. I don't envy anyone being a parent right now. It
No.
is very difficult to understand what is happening, and like it's really hard to see how your kids are chatting with other people. I mean, like especially if your Gen Z has a Finsta and you're like, which is the real thing, and they don't tell you the Finsta is there. So it's like I can definitely see how the pandemic proliferated cyberbullying because it just makes it so much easier and there's no one to stop you, right? So, I think that
So
brings out the
much.
worst in people sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. To your point of like it being so much harder to detect as parents, I feel like I just want to like highlight that because I feel like a lot of parents talk about like um device control, right? Like trying to like monitor how many hours their kids are on the internet and whatever. And maybe they were actually able to do that. Doubt it. But like maybe they were more easily able to do that when it was pre-pandemic. But when you like have to be on the internet to be at school and school is like 6 7 hours a day or whatever, like you don't know what your kid is doing during those hours. They're probably just like dicking around. How many people are like actually paying attention to their teacher through a Zoom webcam for 2 years, 6 7 hours a day? Yeah, right. They definitely have like their chat open and like are simultaneously on TikTok or whatever, and you as a parent are probably so stressed, like working your own job in the other room or like doing all the other things to like keep the family going, that you cannot possibly be seeing what your kid is doing. So like, yeah, someone could be like in class, quote unquote, in class, and then also like being bullied or bullying via social media at the same time. Just like their face is on the screen, but they're doing other shit at the same
Yeah.
time.
And even if you just think about it from that perspective, like if you as an adult are struggling in this current situation and you have your full capacity of having learned social structures, how to communicate, how to work with other people, and you're struggling, think about how difficult it must be for a teenager or a kid who doesn't have all of that, who's still building all of that and can't build all of that because they're not really in person with other people. They're struggling. They don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And I like it's a shitty situation all around because it's just kind of like a general failure. I don't think kind of what you're saying, um, that I mean, aside from the people who are like really sadistic, like I don't think anyone particularly enjoys bullying people. Like I don't it's not like a fun that it's like something that you hurt someone else, but like eventually that hurts you too, right? Because it's a
I
ripple.
think it takes some self awareness to understand that.
That's true, but I'm just saying, like, let's say, generally speaking, the welfare of this person is not great. Like, they have some kind of issue that they're not dealing with, and that's being pushed onto other people.
Hmm.
As you're still learning the social structure, like, being in a social structure enforces, like, good behavior, bad behavior, right? And if you're outside of that, that starts to disappear for you, right? And especially if you're on the internet, because you're like, oh, no one can tell who I am. Who can tell I'm doing a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah.
And I think that that can create negative behaviors where there may not have been before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To your point of kind of like the social structures not existing to kind of reinforce what is good or bad, I also think to your point, a lot of people don't mean to be mean, but maybe they say something that is hurtful and they don't know that it's hurtful. And when it's an online space, a lot of times the way you interact with people then is one on one. It's like a chat or like a message, a DM, like, or you leave a comment or like whatever. It's like harder to be in like group settings, right? Unless it's like a group Zoom, but those are so awkward, blah, blah. Anyways, there's a lot more of like direct channel communication. So maybe you say something to someone, say you're a kid, right? Like a teen or whatever. You say something to someone that like you don't think is that mean, but like it's actually pretty hurtful. And then the only person who witnessed that was like the person you said it to. You're not getting that like social feedback from like normally it would be like maybe you said it in front of like your friends and then someone would be like, dude, that's kind of mean. Why would you say that? You know? Or like your mom over here saying, they're like, whoa, how could you say that? And then you know that it's bad. And you don't get that when it's online. So I could see a lot of it of like what is called bullying could be just like unchecked, behavior that the kid even doesn't really know was going to be that hurtful. Um, and then just like won't, it'll compound. I can see it compounding of like, oh, just like so much unchecked behavior of like kind of borderline bad. And
Hmm.
then not knowing that it's actually that bad. And then coming out 2 years later being like kind of a
I'm a
shittier,
monster. Yeah.
not a monster, but just like, there's just like a lot of shit. Like, I don't want to compare. Okay, I'm not saying like humans are animals. We kind of are, but like, for example, I watched a show on Netflix that's about dogs being trained, and there was one dog that they featured that was like taken from its mom at like 2 weeks old, which is not, it's like a no. Like usually dogs for adoption are like 6 to 8 weeks, and it's because during those few weeks it's like really critical for the mom to like check their pup essentially. If like it's like trying to like bite at its brothers and sisters are like wandering off or whatever, and the mom kind of like, yeah, checks it like physically, and then it learns these like fundamental things like, oh, I should not do this, this is bad, whatever. And then that dog was taken away so soon that the trainer was explaining like that's why it's such a bad dog. It's not really a bad dog, it's just like it never learned that was like not okay, and now we have to like put in extra effort to teach that dog. So I could see it being kind of like that. Again, not saying a human is equivalent to a dog, but like there are certain things in this like very impressionable age of like kid to young adult where you don't know how to behave necessarily
Hmm.
until you've
Hmm.
had enough practice in social interactions with lots of different people to know like, oh, this is hurtful to other people. Oh, this is like, I would not want to be treated this way. And it's like, I'm not putting myself in their shoes and blah, blah, blah. And being on the internet can just like obfuscate all of that.
So I have my own ideas about why people troll on the internet, but I think it's kind of like, for me, I feel like, let me just say, like, if I were to be a troll, the reason I would be a troll is because there are things I want to say, but I don't want to say publicly. Like, I don't want people to identify them to me, but I want to say certain things to certain people where I'm like, you're stupid, you're wrong, you're ugly. Um, but it's hard for me to, like, it's really hard for me to imagine the motivation sometimes because I'm a really lazy person. So I'm like, I'm not going to go out of my way to create a new account just to message this person that they're done. Like, I got better things to do with my time. I would rather be watching TV. I'd rather be petting my cat. I need to pick up shit on my floor. Like, I have so many other things to do. I would rather do those things than go online and like shit on someone because what's the point? Like, I don't get anything out of it. um However, I think when you describe it like that, I start to think like there must be like something fundamentally eating at the person that they would do that, because what rational person would spend time on the internet shitting on people when you have so many other things to do, right? So I think about a troll as someone who has like, they're not, probably don't have a lot of social connections, right? They probably don't have a lot going on in their lives because otherwise they'd be doing other stuff. Um, and those are kind of, I think, the two main drivers for me when I think about it. And they obviously have some kind of like stressors on their life or negativity on their life, which is causing them to go on the internet to lash out in that way. But I think it's like similar to the teens, it's like lack of a social network or social structure, lack of fundamentally stuff to do, right? If you're in a class 6 to 7 hours a day, you don't really do anything. You're pretty bored. And then you have this thing where you know, it could be COVID, it could be loved one passed away, whatever. You have this whatever stressor that is causing you to lash out in certain ways. I don't think I've ever trolled anyone, but I will say, like, professionally, sometimes it's really hard to keep your temper, right? Especially if you're working in a high stress situation and like you feel like the people you're working with are not holding up their ends. Like I've definitely gotten in certain situations where I said something to someone and I was like, that was not helpful in any way. It was not professional. Like it didn't serve anything except for my need to tell this person that they are dumb or whatever. And that all comes from the same kind of thing where it's like there's a stressor and then I'm like bleh to you, and I didn't really want to do that, but I was just like so in the moment about this, however I was feeling, that I did it. But I'll pass over to you to say what you think as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And actually, the work thing is a really good example because that's not even like an anonymous version of bullying, and it's not an intentful bullying either. And I've done the exact same thing. I think there is just something, there's like different layers of reasons someone might say something that is hurtful on the internet. And the like least intentional is kind of the one you just described of like, even when you are not anonymous and you are just at work and you're just communicating, there is a big difference between an in person and like an online email or chat or whatever. And the ease, I honestly think that like ease of saying whatever you were thinking is a big reason people say things that they shouldn't be saying. Because when you don't have to face that person or even video, right? Like sometimes you wouldn't even say these things. Like if you just had a video conference on and you were facing each other, even cyber, but video, you would never say what you were going to say. And so I think there is just some like ease of like your fingers just start flowing. It's like stream of consciousness, right? Like I think when you talk out loud in real life or via video, you are forced to filter. Your brain is forced to like filter what you're gonna say before you actually blurt something out. Most of the time, right? Like I obviously like still have said things that I shouldn't be saying out loud, but that filter gets shut down a lot lower when you are like via internet, even non-anonymous email and like chat or whatever. You're just like, I'm just fucking pissed, and then you're just like blah blah blah, blah. And then you hit enter and you're like shit. It's like too late.
What you were talking about with different levels, like that is, I feel like the reason that it's acceptable to do that is because when you're doing like a Slack or you're doing like an email, that is like a level one anonymity. Because you're not actually like you're in my brain, I'm like, oh, that you don't necessarily see the person at the other end of what you're doing because you're just writing the email and it's just an email, and that email is like disassociated slightly from the
Mm-hmm.
person, which is why you can just be like blah, and it's okay at
Mm-hmm.
the moment. um but why you wouldn't like face to face, even on a video, be like burp necessarily. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then going levels down, right, into like actual anonymity and people on the internet like purposely saying mean things, like not just like, oops, didn't know that would be hurtful, like purposefully saying like you're stupid or like this is dumb, blah blah blah. I agree. I think a lot of it has to do with like they have their own shit going on that they're not dealing with. Either like they don't have a lot of things going on, like you said, or they have like misfortune happening in their lives that they'd rather not deal with head on and instead are kind of like directing their attention elsewhere to kind of distract themselves. I think a lot of it also comes down to the lack of accountability that you need to have when you say these things on the internet. So like you said, oh, there are all these times I've thought about saying like you're stupid, you're ugly, blah blah blah, but you don't do that. And a big part of it is like, well, whether you're anonymous or if you were not anonymous and you actually said that, you'd have to take accountability, right? And when you are anonymous, you don't really, because it's really hard for people to like figure out who you are, especially when you're a user
Yeah.
95612. And so it gives you the permission to be an asshole because no one's going to be able to like figure it out who you are. And so a lot of people, it's similar to what we were talking about during like the pandemic when there was all the like anti-Asian stuff, which is like a lot of people were thinking these things before COVID started. And it was
Originated.
after that came out, it was like everyone got this permission to like release all these like anti-Asian thoughts that they had. And some people even did so anonymously, like like in real life, and just like say things to people's faces, which is like awful. But amplify that even more on the internet where people can be anonymous and take no accountability for it and just be like, I've always hated you. Now I get the chance to like tell you that I hate you and not take any responsibility for that.
Absolutely. And when you were saying that, what was coming to my brain was the like risk reward for being a troll, basically. And like when I described that for myself, there's no risk, right? I could do that anonymously, but there's also no reward for me. Like I'm not gonna get, like I would rather be doing all these other things. That reward is higher for me than trolling people. But for other people, like how things have changed, have shifted, how they evaluated their risk and their reward for being an online troll or expressing things that they may not have expressed before, which is why all these things are just like coming out of the woodwork. Like crazy people are thinking they can say whatever they want and it's cool. Like, yeah, that's definitely what's happening.
I think there's also just two more like kind of like speculating things. One is similar to what we were talking about, the kind of like dissociation of like you don't see the other end or whatever. Like I think even though, for example, like on TikTok or whatever, like they're seeing our faces because it's a video based thing, they know that they're not talking to like the actual person. Like it's not like a live
Yeah,
conversation that they're having.
yeah,
So then it feels easier to say something
yeah.
mean because it's like, oh, I'm not like live discussing with you, so it's fine. And then the other aspect is like when you're anonymous, I think there's almost this element of like you decide that you get to be like the judge of everything
Mm,
and there's no like consequence to it, right? You're
mhm.
just like you've like deemed yourself the like ultimate judge overlord of everything to
Yeah,
get to say like what's good, what's bad, what's shit, what's great. And like you've given yourself that power because no one can take it away from you.
hmm,
Like you can just like roll into like Britney Spears' account or like the biggest people on the planet and tell them they're fat and ugly and whatever. And like no one can make you not say that.
yeah.
So you just feel like, oh, now I'm like so important and why should I take this power away from myself? I don't know.
Anyways, to your point of people trolling on famous people's accounts, do you think it's worth it to become internet famous? I mean, like some people are. Would you consider Britney internet famous?
No, she's actually
Yeah, she's
famous.
like
There's a
actually famous.
difference.
Yeah,
There's a difference.
internet famous are like people who are Jojo Siwa is internet
hmm
famous. I think. Who else?
I mean, every TikToker,
Yeah,
every
yeah, yeah, yeah.
like
YouTube
influencer,
person. Yeah.
content creator, yeah, is internet famous. Like anyone who was completely unknown until they made a personality for themselves on the internet
Hmm.
is what I consider like internet famous. And some of them actually like transcend into like
Different categories.
non-internet
Yeah.
things, but like if they started with that, that's what I deem internet fame.
Okay. Um.
You go first.
Well, I told you I've started this like thought Instagram account, Finsta, basically, and I can tell you it's not. I mean, like it's not that it's like I started with a very specific goal, which is to be like attention seeking, which is like fine. But also like there are some like unfun aspects of it because like random people will message you with some level of entitlement, being like, like we should hang out and like we should see each other, and I'm like, no, we shouldn't. Like I'm just here for like cute people to hit me up, and you're not cute. Or like people will send like unsolicited like dick pics, and I'm like,
Mm.
like this is not like it better be a really good dick pic if you send me a dick pic, and it's not that good.
do think it's worth it, or you don't think it's worth it, or what
It
was
has
the
not been worth it so far.
I see, I see.
I thought it would be like really easy where you post like a thirsty photo and a million people will follow you, and apparently that's not the case anymore.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of people
I
posting a
know,
lot of
I
stuff.
know,
Yeah,
I
it's
know.
hard to sift through.
I will say like probably the negative part of it is that like I do follow a lot of other like thought accounts to try to like replicate what they're doing, and it the explore page is like a little bit stressful because I'm like everyone looks so beautiful and there's so many
Mm.
of them that I'm like this is crazy. But then on the other hand, sometimes people will pop up on my explore where I'm like this person's not cute. Why do they have like 10,000 followers?
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
It's hard to say.
Mm.
The internet is a strange place.
Your turn.
Well, yeah. For me, first I'll kind of like we made this big distinction between like real famous versus like IRL famous, right? Versus internet famous. And I've had the same discussion with so many people, which is like a lot of people who covet being famous really just covet wealth because they think of like, oh, if I were famous, I'd get a private jet. I'd like have money to buy all these mansions, like fancy cars and like rich clothes and whatever, right? And they don't think of the downside. So, for example, we mentioned Britney. Britney, I feel so bad for Britney for like so many different reasons, but like forget the conservatorship. I watched this documentary of her like 10 years ago where she was like, I can't even like go shopping. Like I decide to randomly go to like a boutique shop to buy some clothes and there's like 500 paparazzi outside and I can't even like enjoy my
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about like that aspect, I've always said like I'd rather just be rich and anonymous than be like
Oh,
famous,
yeah.
right? Because then you enjoy all the perks of being famous without the like annoyingness of like people, to your point, of like feeling entitled towards you. Like people who are like fans of famous people, they feel like they know them. So then
Oh,
they
yeah.
feel entitled to like go up and like
Mhm.
demand things and like to the most extreme stalk them, right? And like expect some sort of real relationship with them, which is crazy. So I've never wanted that. But now when we're in this like weird space of like we're like content creators now and like we're, trying to like create some sort of footprint, I'm conflicted because I think I don't personally want to be famous in internet famous and that like I don't want stalkers. I don't want like people to
Mhm.
like come up to me randomly on the street and whatever. I still don't want that. But at the same time, because the means of like us creating this footprint is through us talking and like our personalities being out there, I can't be an anonymous rich person, like in the like
Yeah.
other scenario, right? I
Yeah.
my face is inherently attached to it. And I think I can't definitively say if it's worth it or not because for me, a big motivator to do this podcast is that I think a lot of what we say is really important. Not like not everything we say is important. Like I don't
Right.
think us getting drunk and watching Sailor Moon is necessarily like the most the deepest conversation. But I think sometimes we talk about really important things, for example, the
Mhm.
Ukraine war.
Mhm.
Other times, like we mentioned, just us existing and being able to talk about stupid shit, but us being Asian and like putting our faces out there and making it normal for people who look like us to be in media, I think that is important. So, the big reason why I'm spending so much time to like make a footprint is that I think more people should be viewing our stuff to like benefit from shared experiences, things they never knew about, or just seeing people who look like them and knowing that that's normal. Like I think that's really important, and that's why I want to grow it so more people see it. But at the same time, I personally don't want it. Like I have this other side where I'm like I don't want it to grow at all because I don't want more people to come in to like be assholes towards us. I don't want potentially people to like stalk me and like do all these
Yeah.
like cancel me, like all these things that come with like putting yourself out there. I don't want any of those things, but at the same time I want our message to get out. So it's just like it's really frustrating because I can't separate the internet because I see that there's both. There's like this
Yeah.
dumb stupid part of the internet that I really shouldn't care about, but then there's this like really fruitful part of the internet where people are having like, real conversations and like getting real meaning. Like the number of people who've said like thank you so much for like sharing these stories that I felt so alone about this until I like heard you talk about this, or like I'm learning more about my culture by listening to you guys talk about it on your podcast. Like the number of those types of messages that we get make it impossible for me to say like this is stupid and not worth my time.
Mhm.
So I just like I'm very conflicted. I don't have a yes no.
Yeah, I hear what you're basically like. You don't want the negative impacts of fame for creating an earnest conversation,
Yeah.
right? It's tricky because, like, I feel like let's take the Kardashians, for example. I don't think that any like, they have real lives that's never seen by anybody.
Yeah.
So, like, they've done the opposite, where it's like they've created a disearnest is not a word, but it's a false conversation about their lives to hide their real lives so they don't have to deal with, let's say, the impacts of fame.
I truly just wish people on the internet would do a basic filter of like, if I were actually in front of your face right now, would you actually say that to my face live? If yes, say it. Say it. Like if you would truly say that to my face and I have the right to respond to you, say it to me. But like if you would feel bad saying it to my face, don't fucking say that shit. Like because think about it, like if I were to say that to you, would you be happy? Like it's just like golden rule, right? Like most basic fundamental thing we learn as children is like don't be a fucking asshole. If you can't even be brave enough to have actually said that in real life, you don't get the right to say that on the internet, guys. Like just be
If
kind.
if you want to dish it, you better be able to take it. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
this is the truth.
Exactly. And actually, I want to wrap this up, but like,
Sure.
I actually found there was a difference in like, because I mentioned like all these trolls, right, in the beginning,
Mhm.
because I'm still learning all this social media shit, right? And so it was like the first kind of wave of things that like really took off for us on TikTok. And so all these people just like came in with like unsolicited opinions, right? And a lot of them kind of like rude or mean. And then with this Ukraine stuff, the recent Ukraine war clips that we put out, I put like exactly my sources of like where I was drawing this information, and I wrote on the video, kind corrections welcome. And I noticed a huge difference in the way that people responded with just that little caveat, because then people were like, they acknowledged things like, oh, this is like mostly right, but there are some nuances you didn't get right. Here, let me add some nuance. As opposed to saying like, this is wrong, blah, 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 which is how people were responding to like my other stuff before. So I think when you acknowledge, like, I'm open to feedback, but be kind, like, people are generally actually nicer about that. Maybe because they realize that we're human, because we like put that thing in there of like, I'm not just a fucking robot who wants to like receive mean things. Be
Yeah,
nice to me if you're gonna like make corrections. I think it makes a difference. It's kind of interesting.
I think it makes sense. I mean, you're like prompting the person to do something, right? So if we're talking about, I mean, the internet is no social structure,
No.
like the way that we think about real life. But if you want to think of that message as like a reinforcing thing to remind the person, like, hey, you're here, but like, I would appreciate it if you were still like talking like a real person, not like a crazy person.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe reminded them, like, hey, I cannot just like blah
Yes,
whatever comment I want. Yeah.
exactly.
Interesting.
All right. Well, on that kind of more uplifting note, transitioning now to the fortune cookie closing section. And it's not exactly a high note, but we just want to acknowledge that like everything we've talked about today can be like really heavy. Especially like we talked a lot about how this whole world can impact young people who are still like quite impressionable, and how it can have like a really hard impact on self-esteem and like mental health and all that. So I think we just wanted to end on providing a few resources for around anti-bullying, depression, people who have suffer from depression or suicidal thoughts, those kinds of things, just to remind you that like you're not alone and that this shouldn't be normalized, that you just like accept these things that people are throwing onto you, or like these hard feelings that you're dealing with, and there are people out there that want to talk to you and help you get through it.
Yeah.
But this is specifically for US people. National kind of like database for where you can try to find something local to you is stopbullying.gov.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like a get help now kind of like subpage, and you can like find actual resources local to you. So put that out there. And then because I represent California, there's one that's California specific that I found was interesting. I think they actually started it like semi recently, maybe because of the pandemic and
Mm.
realizing like how much of a toll it's taking on young people. There is a California specific mental health for youth program, and it is IndieFlix, so Indie INDIE Flix FLIX, indieflix.com/California.
Mm.
It's like an actual, like, I think it's like an online module type thing where they
Mm.
like walk you through this program around mental health, like awareness and like how to deal with these feelings of like difficulty with your mental health, especially during these like hyper cyber times.
Mm.
And it's specifically for California. So if you're in California and you're either your parent or you're a young person that's like dealing with this and you don't really know how to like approach mental health topics, maybe this could be a good program for you. So those are my two.
Cool. So I will not rep a location, but rather my LGBT plus
Mm-mm.
friends, folks. The first one I think a lot of people have heard of, which is just the Trevor Project. So it's just thetrevorproject.org. You can reach a counselor, I think, digitally, and you can also call them. So, oh, and you can also text them. So if you're in need of talking to someone, if someone has said something really rude or mean to you, like you can get a hold of a counselor to chat with you right away. And the second one, also because this has been a huge issue recently with a lot of trans people being like killed and targeted. Trans Lifeline, I think, is also a great one. So the website is just translifeline.org. And it's the same kind of thing. They've got a hotline that you can call for any kind of resources, anything that you need. So hopefully these will be helpful to everyone listening. And we hope that even if you are not being bullied, you could spread these resources if you know someone who needs
Yeah.
them as well as a listener
Yeah.
of ours.
Totally. Great. Well, man, I feel heavy talking about this, but if you have comments, feedback, experiences that you want to share related to these topics, you can either email us at telluswhereyou'refrom@gmail.com, or you can DM us, comment, whatever on our various social media. Um, because yeah, I think it's something weird that we like all kind of have to deal with now that we live in this like hyper digital hybrid worlds. So yeah, let us know what you think and come back next week because we'll have another episode for you then. And until then, 再
再见
见
bitches.
bitches.